you know, when people say, well, I think there's that saying, an ounce of practice is worth a ton of theory. I think that captures something true, but do you think that's another instance of the theory practice dichotomy or split?
Um, it can be. I think it usually people say it usually to reflect that people get in their head too much. But I do think the phrasing is probably does stem from that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even in your head too much is like, it's like the same with overthinking. When you say, oh, you
Yeah.
overthink, it's like, it just means you're not thinking very well. Like you're not going, I don't know what the answer is, so I need to go out into reality and test this thing now. Um,
Yeah.
but it's funny how many, but there is some truth to it. I guess it's kind of like, it does capture something when you say it. Like you are capturing some problem, but it's just not, we can just go with not very precise identification of the problem maybe.
Yeah. I think the practice, of course, is the validation, checking that it works in reality, that a theory is worth nothing unless it can have some correspondence with reality. I think that's what it tries to capture, but people say like oh, theory is detached from reality, but which would be kind of true. You don't want theory to be detached from reality. That's usually how I think of it. Like you gotta have the practice in reality to even validate it, to even say it's true.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess one side would be validation. Sorry, I got some balm in my eyes, so they're burning. One aspect would be validation, but then I guess the other one would be sometimes you don't know things, and if you're not thinking clear about it, you keep trying to find an answer, but there's not, you're not going to find it by, let's say doing research. You've got to literally incrementally learn by going out, then reflecting, learning, going out, reflecting, learning, whatever project it is you're working on. So
Yes.
I think for me, that's what I think of when I hear that. When I hear that. Okay. Is there any work done on methods or approaches of maximizing like subconscious integration? I know there's research done on sleep and like that helps. I don't know what consolidate memories means, but apparently it helps consolidate memories. I assume that has something to do with integration. But like, if you're learning a new idea, like now, for example, I'm studying hipster philosophy, right? What would be a way to like get my subconscious to work with me apart from just doing it, a whole day dedicated to it, for example? I'm just pouring tea.
Well, like you said, like sleep can help consolidate. Consolidate is really just to say the neurons fire more appropriately, that they alter their firing pattern, things like that. Like they consolidate it. It's just more organized. That's all. Like whatever your brain does automatically to do that, just to make them accessible, things like that. And of
Yeah.
course, that would help the subconscious elements you're talking about. And say certain like space learning habits, like I was telling you about, like you can't really control why it works, just that it does. I mean, those are the sort of things that you can work on. And I think that's the best example of research that could be done about what works subconsciously.
You're talking about spaced repetition and sleep, basically, are the only.
Yeah, those I've seen the most evidence about,
Got
and
it.
I can talk the most about. I mean, there could be other things um, like the way that changing your environment can seem to help motivate your creative thinking,
Yeah.
changing the context of where you are. Those
Yeah.
are some things that can change what sort of memories you have access to as
Right.
easily and things like that.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That's more anecdotal evidence. Like you hear about Carl Jung going into a retreat in the forest for like a week, and a few
Yeah.
other, forget, Bill Gates doing his like week every year, get away for a week and read books, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's based on good theory, though. There's a lot of research to be done on that, but
Right.
I think I've seen different studies validating that kind of thing. I mean, those are the more direct things that have the more direct evidence for. There's other stranger things that are hard to validate or much research on, like certain sort of drugs can alter your, not even like altered states of consciousness, but even just like different sort of drugs that can help for different, like faster memory processing or whatever. But those are more experimental things that it's hard to really get into.
But they're also, I've read about some of them. I was looking, like modafinil and those kind of like smart study drugs, I think they're called. Nicotine, even if you just get the nicotine. But the issue with those things is that they're temporary. So you're not
Right.
like, it's not a long-term solution. Like if it was study all this stuff, take this drug and it helps consolidate your memories and arrange them and increase the memory, recall for forever, that's one thing. But if it's like you have to constantly take it to operate at that level, that's different.
Yeah. I mean, aside from like the techniques I mentioned, like spaced repetition and changing context of where you study and sleep. Anything else is just a matter of, I think, just time. Time is just a big part of it. Just you keep going out and reviewing things sometimes, and just eventually it sticks better. Just reviewing can do that.
Spaced repetition is difficult because it's like, it's conducive to small facts that you can memorize,
Yeah.
like this happened on this date, but then how do you capture like a large amount of conceptual information? I don't know. That's where it's really hard to know what
Well,
that's like.
I should clarify. I don't mean like the usual spaced repetition to get out of facts, and I mean more like blocks of study time
Oh,
and
okay.
making sure to take breaks
Yeah,
to
okay.
let things just be,
Yeah.
to let your brain do its work
Yeah.
as far as consolidation. And that can help.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have a document here for you to look at. Okay. So I started reading through ITOE. I guess I have a general question. So far, I'm into like the second or third chapter. So I'm just before abstractions, or I'm just on to
Yeah.
abstractions from abstractions. And I find it difficult to like, what do I do with any of this stuff? Like, okay, I get it. I sort of understand it's emitting measurements and this kind of thing. Is there any use value for this, or is this super theoretical? Like, I don't know if I'm gonna manually think about like the emission of measurements. I sort of get from OPAR that you just get the essential of whatever it is, and the essential is the thing that explains the most, and that's it. But then what do you actually do with this stuff? Is my question so far.
Well, as far as the theory in particular,
Yeah, all from ITO, all this stuff from ITO. Like, I mean, it's interesting, but I'm just like, it's so abstract that I'm like, where does this go? Is my,
well, I think as far as the first 3 chapters are the most valuable, is just I think it just lays out a way to think about new concepts and to organize them.
right,
And I don't think it's much more than that. I mean, it lays out the theory, and the practical usage just makes for more efficient thinking. If you
right,
organize your concepts this way, that's what it does.
right,
And of course, you could take it into the more academic side, where you just focus more on the day-to-day side, just like what to focus your mind on to help your understanding, so that you feel in focus, in control.
got it. Okay. Well, it's interesting, so I'll keep reading and see if I can find applications to any of the, because I have tons of questions, obviously. So maybe there's some applications to some of the questions that I had. So it's not directly obvious, but we'll find out as I get through the whole thing.
At least the first 3 chapters, reading those help make the connections to reason and all those other things we've been talking about a little easier.
Got it. When you say make the connection to reason, what connection between what?
Like questions you've had about uncertainty, I think.
Okay.
And questions like, when is somebody good as opposed to, or when is somebody bad or evil, or
right.
What's the line between good and evil?
Got it. Mm-hmm. Okay. In the start of the book, it talks about in the history of philosophy, they essentialized to 4 schools: extreme realists, so
yeah,
abstract exist as real entities in another dimension of reality. Oh, that's interesting. That the extreme realists are the ones where they exist in another dimension. Moderate, which is Aristotle, where the abstractions are in reality. Nominalists, I think, whatever, we can name whatever we want to on the basis of vague resemblances. Not as images. Okay, whatever. So these are the schools. And then I was curious, like, have you seen any of these schools like play out in academia or like in certain thought patterns? Like I can think of, let's say, maybe a moderate realist or extreme realist being someone who like sits and expects knowledge to enter their mind if they're working on some project. Like if they're studying maths and they're like, I just don't get it. I just don't get it. Because they're approaching it by not asking many questions. They just expect the concept to somehow just go into their head. That would be an example, like a day-to-day. But like, have you seen any of this, any like any sort of obvious pattern play out, even in your field, like in psychology or anything like that, where you can say, oh, clearly this is a kind of nominalist view or a conceptualist view, that kind of thing?
It's not so bad in the recent, I guess, 40 years, I guess.
Right.
In Rand's time, it would probably be different. I mean, that we're talking about the 60s here. Extreme realists seem to be more like, at least in the sense Rand is using it here, maybe more like those new age sort of people that like believe in like stones give you power, like, or like gemstones have special power, or like you have your chakra or whatever. Like, I mean, usually it's like it's in another realm. These powers are another realm, or you're trying to connect to the astral plane. I mean, that's the more not academic, but there are people like that out there. I mean, that would be this extreme kind. Like the reality is there, but you're just not in tune or in touch with it.
But isn't that subjectivism? Isn't that, I'm trying to get a hold of all these terms. Isn't that like a form of you make your own reality? Or do you think that wouldn't be because they're trying to commune with a different dimension?
They might not be saying that their mind made reality. I mean, it's not a really clear thing. I think
right. Yeah.
These would just be subjective, that it boils down to subjectivism. But if you just talk about generally, like they're trying to commune with this other dimension.
Yeah. Okay.
Or really the idea there is that there's the physical world we know, and then there's the abstract world, which we don't have direct contact with. And the way you contact reality is more like, that's where it can be like a religion maybe, or as wild as like you're connecting to the astral plane. Like, but either way, they're the true dimension where the truth is, where the real, like your senses could be in the way, that you don't really see the world as it really is.
What I have trouble with is that it's in all those examples you gave, even someone who's like, let's take someone who's not religious but believes in a God of love, and that's as far as that's as far as what their belief is. Well, they say, without exploring it further, just some God that's out there that loves, or whatever that means. I don't know. But the tricky part is like, we can all compartmentalize. Like I told you about someone who says they believe in energies or something like that, and they're successfully running like a big, I don't know, multinational business or whatever. Like that, those things are like, none of this is, I guess, because none of these are like consistently followed. So it's hard to pin anything on any of them, I think. And to know what role that plays in the actual person's operating, like you gave the example of someone who's got stones. Maybe they're just like, I just like the stones. And and then it's just like a thing that at night they think that it communes with another, they pretend it communes with another dimension. And the next day they forget about it. So it's like, it's hard to, in reality, it's really hard to pin, I think, for me,
For sure.
to connect it with these categories. So it's pretty confusing in that sense, because you're like, okay, this is the thing in essence, but then when I see someone out there in the world, like it's not followed, so you can't really. It's hard for me anyway. It's hard for me to make the connections in that case.
Yeah, in those cases, sure, because I mean, you're asking a question about compartmentalization. Like, to what extent do people compartmentalize their beliefs? That they can believe it on at midnight, but then the rest of the time they don't believe it. In a way, like, I mean, people do manage to do that, and yeah, they're contradicting their own beliefs. It's not consistent, I guess.
But there was a section in PAR I read. I still don't get it, but it was interesting, and I was like, I want to keep looking into this. That part about like one evasion consistently followed implies unconsciousness. I didn't. He gave an explanation, but I can't say that I was like, yeah, that makes complete sense. I was like, I need more time to think about this. But he gave that example, which I think is interesting as far as compartmentalization goes. And same with what we discussed. It goes back into the discussion we had, which again, I'm still not clear on this. That everything is interrelated. All knowledge is interrelated because of causally or whatever. I think it relates to that, although I don't know how it plays out if you compartmentalize in that sense. So,
I mean, you could think of this here as that little chart we did about mind and body.
yeah. But even that was like split, right? I was preparing that to post about it, but it's like, it's all split up. Like, you have someone who's, I've even got quotes from the book I'm reading now about all these people that are like, you're like, well, is he pragmatist? You can't even tell, because there's like all these different aspects that don't seem to be along one plane of, mind-body dichotomy.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that simple, but as far as at least the one measurement, you can kind of see, but then
Right.
of course you get into complications.
Right.
I don't think it's supposed to be too, I mean, it's just essentializing the one measurement. I mean, you're right, you have to distinguish in many other ways. That if you want to capture the full picture of the person, you need more kinds of measurements. Like you have to measure, what do they think about morality, about epistemology, about like, what do they believe their purpose in life is? Or do they believe there's such a thing, or things like that can make further distinctions.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, I can see how there's a lot to think about as far as this goes. Like, you'd have to understand if all knowledge is interrelated, and why and how in like concrete ways, like what it means to evade something, which I think maybe that's a bit of like that's implied in compartmentalization.
Yes.
Not consistently, but sometimes there'll be evidence that will definitely counter it, and you're going to have to question it. And so, yeah, there's a lot, but I think you could probably still find a way to get your head around it. Isn't that what essence is? Like, my question of at what point is someone evil? It relates to that, because it helps you answer then at what point do you say someone is a realist or a nominalist? Same thing. There's some way to categorize. Otherwise, we wouldn't be we wouldn't be walking around saying, oh, that person's charismatic or that person is brave. Like there's definitely ways to think about it, but they're not clear to me right now.
Yeah, you could add more dimensions sometimes, and I think that makes sense sometimes. Like you got mind, body, and then like two axes. But it gets complicated from there. But it depends the precision you need. If you are looking for more precision, yeah, add some measurements or add some distinctions. I mean, you can begin this very general way. If you need more information, you narrow it down, you develop more concepts, figure out more measurements.
Right.
Like in a way, like you could use a ruler to measure, say, your height, but you wouldn't want to use a ruler to measure the length of grains of sand. You need a new tool for that. You're still measuring length, but you need to find a new tool to measure it. You might need microscopes. You might need new measurements. Like you might need to start measuring like electrons or something, and it starts to change. But either way, you're still measuring length. You just need new tools to new measurements or new standards of measurement.
I guess all these questions just reduce to how do you judge people? What is the method which you use to judge people without overreaching and making, unfair assumptions and that kind of stuff. So, which is all, I think that's, maybe there's more of that in the virtue section. I haven't gotten to any of that. They're just like, you need to be objective in the way you judge, which is like, all right, well, how do you do that? I don't know. But we can get onto that, I'm sure, once we get onto virtues and that kind of thing. And justice. All right. Do you think that this, when it says consciousness is not a passive state, does that mean we're always in some level of focus unless we're dead? I think we discussed this last.
So.
Yeah. So even if you're like, sensations are differentiated and integrated, aren't they?
Yeah.
So then you are. Okay. So you're always in an active process. It's just a question of how much, which is focus.
Yeah. I mean, if it's conscious, yeah. I mean, if there's things going on, but there is no awareness, then, or if it were passive, it would be something else. That's all it's really saying.
Right.
Like computers are, you can say they're receiving information, but they're not directing it really. They are passive. So not in any sense they're conscious because they're not directing. It's just goes in, goes out. That's all.
That distinction isn't as clear to me. Like,
okay.
Active in what sense? Like, what's the difference there?
Well, it's not self-directed. That's
okay.
That's all I could really say.
Okay. Like one is coded, the other one is, well, yeah. I mean, even that's not clear to me because like I said, I'm not fully clear on free will yet, but that's we can skip that. I think, well, I'll come back to that.
Yeah, I read these chapters today, so
okay.
I know I remember. But then it talks about the sensations not retained in memory. Really, yeah, in the sense she means like the edges of objects, that happens automatically. Those would be like sensations, I guess. It's not really a psychologically accurate term, but I know what she's saying.
What are you referring to?
When Rand says sensations are not retained in memory, sensations versus percepts.
And so what are you saying about that? Sorry.
Well, sensations wouldn't. I'm not sure what the accurate term in psychology would be, but I mean, sensations would be like the edges of objects, like knowing what the edge of a desk is, or things like that.
Sensations at edges of objects.
Or for example, I mean, like the sensations are like the building blocks that your cells pick up on that you're not aware of like individually, but you're aware of entire objects.
Right.
And the percept is like the object you're aware of, the whole thing. You're not trying to pick it apart. The sensations would be like the curve or something, the orientation of something, the edge of something. Like those little minor things would be sensations, but percepts would be the whole, the entire object, the thing.
So sensations are touch, like texture, weight. Actually, I don't know. Texture, and then taste maybe, but then percepts are just seeing an object.
Well, I would think even taste would be perceptual. Like you are
Okay.
tasting a whole thing. You're not distinguishing each and every fine molecule. Like your mind automatically integrates into a whole thing.
Got it. Okay. So why did you bring that up though? Was it related to this?
Yeah, I just want to clarify the difference between sensation and percept, where I'm pointing out the more automatic sides of it versus the parts you're directly aware of.
Got it. Automatic first part I'm directly aware of. You mean the difference between the part that your body takes in versus you sense in your brain, like you get the automatic part. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, what do you think of this? I was thinking about what she's saying here about the concept existent needing to be formed first. And then that implicit knowledge allows them to develop further. Do you think in that case, we're talking about rationality doing a heavy lifting. Existent is a simple concept, even though it's the building block of all knowledge. Since all the data is available right in front of you to make the integration, whereas rationality is, because it's further away and requires like all this non-perceptual thinking. Let me just see what oh yeah. So is rationality then a building block of all knowledge? Is like, in a sense, not all knowledge, but is it a building block? When you're talking about a concept that does the most work, are you talking about something that is also a building block?
I think it's just different here because rationality is a method, a way of doing things, a faculty, and existence is itself is a concept.
I guess I'm just trying to work out what makes an integration difficult and important over what makes one easier. Because like in a sense, when we're looking at this now, we're saying, existent is easy, but rationality is hard, but they're both integrations of a lot of things. And so I was like, is it the fact that I was trying to, I don't know, it's not exactly covered by this section, but I was just trying to work out what makes it so like what makes one much more difficult than another to
well, in
integrate.
one way, almost every concept presupposes existence.
Yes.
Well, virtually every concept presupposes existence. Rationality presupposes things differently. Like rationality presupposes that let me how I want to phrase this. Any knowledge you end up with presupposes that you use rationality. That's the method that you use. It presupposes that. And any knowledge you have will always presuppose that you've observed some entity or some existent. I mean, it's not a fine line. I wouldn't say, it depends how you're trying to organize the concepts. I mean, on the one hand, you're just trying to say create a hierarchy of knowledge. So existent would be at the base of everything. Rationality wouldn't be like at the base in the same way. Your concepts aren't all necessarily built on it, but as a method, it's absolutely necessary. You cannot have any knowledge without rationality. You need to apply a rational method to have knowledge. But having the concept rationality is different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, although I'm still not sure what makes, but we can come back to it. It's a difficult, I think it's pretty hard. What makes one thing more important or difficult than another? But let's revisit it, because I'm not clear on that. What you said makes sense. I'm just not clear on this, but yeah, we'll come back to it. Okay, this is what you mentioned.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's not really a question.
Irreducible primaries might make more sense than not really axiomatic.
Why? What's the difference?
Well, I would say that it's not axiomatic in the way that existence is. You can validate it, even prove it based on trying to think how to phrase this.
What, you can prove what? Sorry, an axiomatic concept, you can't prove it?
Yeah, you can't really prove it. It's just all you can do is point at it and just say that's it. Like, I mean, these things are not just pointing. I mean, in some way, I would say they are reducible, or that they can be generalized.
What are, like, perceiving, grasping?
Yeah, perceiving, grasping, apprehending.
Oh, okay.
They're all like types of understanding. I would say it's not like that they can still be taken back or reduced to existence and identity. There's still something about them you could reduce it to.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess you can grasp a concept, but that's not axiomatic. But consciousness is, I think I got confused between those and consciousness. So consciousness is axiomatic, and that axiomatic concept, and that's perception of that which exists, but it doesn't tell you anything about anything else, right? It just tells you I perceive something.
Yeah, that's all it says. It says that things exist, but not what.
Yeah, okay. So when I say perceive, in that context, when I say perceive, it's axiomatic. But if I'm using perceiving or grasping or apprehending in any other context, then it's not. Is it?
Yeah, you would need to remember that's the way you're using it. That when you're saying perceive in this context of coming up with concepts, you're saying it's the base of developing a concept. That's the first thing you need to work with to get there.
What's the difference?
The basic material that you use to create a concept.
What's the difference between axiomatic and irreducible primary? Because you said there's a difference.
Axiomatic just seems more like everything reduces to it. Everything you can only refer to it by pointing at it. You don't really prove that it's true. But I guess irreducible is more like there's no other parts to it. It's hard to explain this. I mean, there are parts.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I didn't even know there was a distinction, so that's cool. I'll just write it down.
I would distinguish irreducible. It'd be like I guess they're almost synonyms. There's very subtle differences, I think.
Cool.
Like if it's irreducible, I
I
would say
thought they were the same thing. So
you can't take it into make any more parts of it. I mean, like imagine if a atom was irreducible, like you couldn't take any more parts out of it. I mean, we know it's not true, but
okay. An irreducible primary. Right. So axiomatic just means it's like you're talking about something you perceive directly and can point to and can't get beneath it. And then irreducible is you can't necessarily directly see it with perception. You have to like through specialized equipment or something like that.
yeah, irreducible is a more broad concept, I say, that it can refer to other things besides concepts. It's just, or even just, I mean, they are very similar words though.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
axioms are irreducible, but not all irreducible things are axioms.
Okay. Oh, I didn't even make that distinction before. Let's go to the next. Okay, I think I wanted to check if I understood this correctly. First, so it's talking about the implicit concept of existence undergoing 3 stages of development in man's mind: awareness of object, of things, representing entity.
Yep.
Second stage is awareness of specific particular things, which you can recognize and distinguish from the rest, which represent identity. The third stage Okay, yeah. So basically, it's talking about it's almost talking about science now. It's talking about a biological process where a baby learns to go through this process of differentiating and integrating to form concepts. Is that what it's talking about?
It could be biological, it could be psychological, it could be either kind of development. They're usually kind of the same. It's not just like the biological cells doing things. It's the way their brain is developing even, and the way their concepts develop. And just even if it wasn't biological, you still have to develop things in a certain order.
Right. And so the order is just sort of inferred on the basis that, well, how can you identify that something is without first identifying that there is something, emphasis on the is.
At first, like there's a something, then it's like the something has an identity, and then the different somethings can be related to one another.
Right. And so you're just inferring that that's the process that a child goes through. Somehow he becomes aware of a thing and then, okay, cool.
Yes.
One thing I didn't get, it says regard entities as units as man's distinctive method of cognition. Do you think like when animals sense like a zebra, like a zebra senses a lion though, doesn't it know like this is something bad? An instance of something bad. Like, isn't that similar in a way? It's like a unit of
Yeah, I think so. I think Rand's villain's often too strong about her claims about other animals. But yeah, they're not as advanced, clearly, and they might not have anything more than a unit, but yeah, they relate things together. I mean, not very complex, and that's usually the extent of their cognition. They barely can do that, but I mean, yeah, zebras can generally distinguish, birds can distinguish certain related things from one another. They just can't extend it to retain that for very long, or they're not able to store it for very long, as we can in concepts. Like we're able to like direct it much better. We can integrate many more units. We can not only integrate what we see in front of us, make units just what we see, but units of any kind of thing. Like there's no limit what we can make into a unit other than that we can perceive it or make sense of it. or hold it in mind.
What are your, this is a random thought, but like, let's say a dolphin or a fly had a conceptual faculty. What could it do anyway? Like, how could it do anything anyway? It's just you wouldn't know because, well, maybe it could do something more intelligent, but you'd say, oh, this is a very intelligent zebra, but like it will try and communicate or something like that. But I mean, on its own, what the hell could it do with a conceptual faculty?
Yeah, I don't think it would even make sense. I mean, that almost goes to show why a fly would never develop that, probably. There is no function of it at all, really, for a fly.
Right.
It would make sense why it didn't develop in other animals for that reason. But that's really speculative. And there's, what you can imagine, what if they did? Like, you're right.
Yeah.
I don't think it would have
What if
any
a
function.
dolphin, like how would a dolphin use it? So
I've been interested in that for sci-fi stories.
yeah,
Imagining if you did give them the ability to use it,
yeah.
would that change their cognition? Like if I gave them an adapted computer and a dolphin could use it, would that make them better able to think? Or would they still be as limited as they ever were? Just as a
Yeah.
sci-fi story, like,
Well, that is interesting. And like, will they build something in their own way? Like, you
yeah,
don't. It's hard to say, right? Like, I think there was in OPA there was something about these puffs, magic puffs, that have
yeah.
to infer that there is an existence of a table or something like that. So I don't know, but I was thinking about it. I was like, well,
Or even some autistic children, they can be nonverbal, but if you give them the right tools, they can communicate. Like they have like boards where they can point at what they want to say, and
right,
then they could use that to point at letters and then point at words, and they could communicate like you or me, but just not as efficiently. But they can point at the words they want to say and what they mean, and that's like giving the right tools of thinking that they otherwise would not be able to really do. It's hard to say would if you didn't give that to them, are they acting like, is there nothing there, or is it that they're struggling? But I would almost think that by giving them the tool, you give them the ability to think.
yeah. Although, if you're talking about an animal with a conceptual consciousness,
True.
like without being like on its own, without
Yeah.
manipulating humans or something like that, can it do anything? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's I don't know. It's not. I haven't given it much thought. Maybe there's something. What's a cross? I don't. What's the difference between a cross classification and a cross classification?
Mhm. I'm not really sure. That was unusual.
Okay.
What would be a, I mean, to me, it's the same.
Okay. I don't know.
Yeah, I
All
couldn't
right.
really tell. I mean, I was thinking just maybe just using more than one measurement at a time, like size and shape or something like that. That's right. That's how I interpreted it.
Got it. Um, can you say that this is a first order concept, or like is it the same order as a lion? Like I know lion is an entity, so it's different. That's not an attribute, but attribute is something that belongs to an entity, or I don't know if you say it that way, but it's part of an entity. But is it first order in the sense that it's something you see and you form an abstraction on that thing you see? Can you call it that?
I would argue it's second order just because it's not primary. Like you need the entity is what you're looking at. Then you're just looking at something about the entity. And I would say that's more second order. I mean, you could argue it's also first order, but either way, one I think it's clearer when you say it's second because you're just trying to take it one step further away from direct perception. You kind of perceive it directly, but or you don't see running in the way that you see a lion running. Like you're
Yeah.
seeing the line, then you're
Yes.
seeing something about the lion running.
Okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah. Um, yeah, maybe you have to see like a lion and a zebra running, and then you're like, oh, that's running or something.
Yeah, and then you could think of like even generalize it further, like the way it's about lions running, or like any animal that moves. You could think of it like
Motion.
locomotion would be like even further away than running.
Yes. Yeah. That makes sense to me because like when I think of like running, I have to imagine something running. I can't just visualize a running in my field. Like,
Right.
so it is more abstract in a way than line. So it's not, if there is an order and you call the things you see, the abstractions you form from the things you see first order, then yeah, I don't think running would be, or an attribute would be first order because it belongs to something like you said.
Yeah.
The requirements of a standard of measurement are that it represents an appropriate attribute, that it be easily perceivable manner, that once chosen, it remain immutable and absolute. I don't know what I'm asking here. Let me think.
Appropriateness.
Yeah. Oh, how do you validate what's an appropriate attribute? Like, is it simply a perceptual thing? Like you're like, um, uh, like if you're talking about length, you're talking about some kind of relationships in your visual field. Like there's no more reducing it than that. There's no more validation of is this thing called length that I perceive an appropriate attribute. I might be trying to get underneath something that I can't get under, like, if you know what I'm saying.
The only question of appropriate there would be is if you're actually measuring, if you're measuring what you're trying to look at, right? Or to accomplish whatever you're trying to accomplish. I mean, appropriateness and standards usually imply a goal or an objective.
Oh, okay.
Like the length would be like a standard of, I don't know, reaching. Like you need it to be able to reach things. So it's appropriate or not if it's in say if you can reach with that length, or if it helps you attain reaching, or helps you grasp objects with your hands.
So in a way, you wouldn't. Uh, Appropriateness is a validation, right? Like if the
Um,
goal, if appropriateness is, does it help you attain the goal, then validation is, does it help you attain the goal that you're using this measurement standard for? They're the same thing. I think this is why it's good to clarify the concepts. Hey, this is interesting. So they're basically, it seems like they might be the same.
yeah, they're almost interchangeable. Like if it's appropriate, you can reduce it. If you can't reduce it, it's not appropriate because you
What do
can't
you
attain a
mean?
goal with something. Or if you
What do you mean
can't
reduce it?
reduce it to the perceptual level, that's all I mean. Like if you can't use length, you can't reduce that to actually the length of things, like reducing from the abstraction to the things that aren't have that do have a length. If you couldn't do that, it wouldn't help you attain any goals. I mean, the fact that things have length and you need to reach things makes it so that you are able to reach and grab things, and for it to be appropriate, for this measurement to be appropriate.
Right. This is pretty messy when it's so abstract. I guess it's all in relation to our body too. That's part of how we
Yes.
perceive
Yes,
length.
that's
And
really what I'm getting at. Like, it's a lot to do with the relationship with your body. Appropriateness you can objectively determine just in relation to your body. I mean, there's a word within psychology. They're called affordances. And usually it's like recognizing an attribute of some, by the nature of some entity or object, allows you to accomplish a goal.
Say
Like
that again. Recognizing.
an affordance is something you recognize about an object that helps you attain a goal.
Okay.
It's in the nature of the object. It's not just what you feel like is in the object, but like I don't know, sticks have a length and they can afford the ability to reach things.
Why is that? Why did they come up with that concept? In what context is that helpful?
Perceptual development, conceptual development, like infants even. How do they so it's a way to explain how perception can develop alongside animals and how it can develop in a goal-oriented way. It's not just that these goals just appear, but it's part of perception. That affordances are what perception is for. Affordance is what perception is for. It helps you recognize opportunities. It affords you the ability to accomplish something that would go for all perception.
Can you, I'm gonna, one sec, we'll end the recording.